Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for our panelists to join our Zoom, and we'll give everybody a couple more minutes here. Good evening, Dr. Schultz. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? You can call me MJ. I'm just a resident.
You're still a doctor. This is fine, MJ. Good evening, Dr. Gubler. Glad to see you made it back there okay.
Good evening. Yep, I made the trip.
That's good. Glad that you're back there.
Hi, MJ.
Hey, Dr. Gubler, how are you?
I'm good. It looks like they haven't killed you yet in your residency.
I got to sleep last night. I was on call the night before, so feeling good now.
We are waiting for Dr. Evans, and then we'll get going here.
Sounds good.
All right, well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so let's go ahead and get going, and I'm sure Dr. Evans will join as soon as he is able. Feel free to put your cameras on and let's have a conversation. We are super fortunate tonight that Dr. MJ Schultz is able to join us and talk about his experiences. He is a second-year resident in orthopedics, and he is at the Jefferson Health Center in New Jersey in orthopedic surgery. And apparently he got to sleep last night, so we're in good shape tonight. Anyway, MJ, is there anything else that you would like to tell us about yourself?
I don't know. I mean, that's great. I imagine conversations will come up as we chat about prior experiences and things, but
Yep.
I met Dr. Gubler before I even started medical school, and he was super influential in my decisions, and so I think you guys have a great person in Dr. Gubler as a leader. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Grubler, is there anything you'd like to say in response?
Well, thanks, MJ. I didn't do much. I just drug him around with me, and he got to see what life was like for a trauma surgeon. And specifically, when we first met, his question was not only about being a physician and orthopedic surgeon, but being a DO in the world we live in. And so we had a lot of opportunity to chat about that. But I can say this about MJ. Of all the students that ever rotated with me or shadowed me, I never had anyone who devoted so much energy and time into his experience. And it was only a week, but he put about a month worth of time in. And if I wasn't in the hospital, he was chasing around one of my partners.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Well, hopefully Dr. Evans will be able to join us tonight. You guys, you are privileged to hear from two orthopedists, and that is one of the things that RVU struggles to match in is orthopedics. And so we were very fortunate. We reached out to a bunch of different people, and it just so happened we ended up getting these two wonderful orthopedists. So we're going to jump right in and talk to Dr. Schultz. Would you like them to call you Dr. Schultz or MJ?
MJ's great.
Okay, you guys, you heard it straight from him. MJ's great. So MJ, can you start out by telling us a little bit about your research background and what you did in medical school versus what you're doing in residency and what the difference looks like for you?
Sure. Yeah. So I think as a medical student, you can sort of, your time is really limited. So one thing that was a priority to me in terms of when I filled an application, like you've got to fill an application for your residency, but I think one thing that I tried to prioritize was learning something from everything that I did. So I did a clinical research fellowship that started between first and second year and sort of continued on. So that started with like a month and a half of didactics, sort of starting from the beginning of, how to design a research study, developing a PICO question, sort of implementing that, and then also, the statistics and writing manuscripts and things like that. So I think what came out of that was a couple of projects, and then I think a whole lot of knowledge that I could take to other research opportunities that were both orthopedic specific and otherwise. So I think medical school was a lot about building a good foundation and having sort of some skills that I could bring to residency. Now that I'm in residency, I'm at a program that does a decent amount of research. We're fortunate to have a research fellow and I think a lot more research infrastructure than I had in medical school, which I'm now realizing makes a huge difference and makes things, I think it helps the process go, and it makes research more exciting and enjoyable because you spend a little bit less time in the weeds. So I think research now is probably more exciting and interesting than it was in medical school, but I wouldn't be able to do a lot of what we do today without those prior experiences.
And I should just say for everyone on the call, if you have a question, feel free to unmute, raise your hand, throw it in the chat, however you'd like. And we really want this to be more of a conversation. So MJ, based on that experience, and thank you for describing that, can you talk a little bit about, do you think it was important that you had orthopedic specific projects? I think that's one of the questions that our students often wonder is it important to really focus in on your specialty and only do research in that field? Or is it more important to get this broad sense of research in medical school?
I think that's a good question. I mean, so I don't know if the whole audience is interested in orthopedics or not, but it's something that I thought a lot about in medical school. When I chose to do this fellowship, there were other opportunities to do more orthopedic specific research, but there were less mentorship opportunities in those situations. And it was sort of just like, here's a partially funded position. You can pick and choose whoever you want your PI to be, and then you make a project and you go for it. Whereas what I ended up choosing to do was much more structured, and I think that benefited me in the long term. So I think a high quality opportunity in a different field is better than a low quality opportunity in orthopedics. But ideally, in the perfect world, you have a high quality opportunity in orthopedics, and that would be the best case scenario.
Did you actually, first I should ask you to tell the students a little bit about where you did your degree.
I went to the University of North Texas Health Science Center, or Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine.
And what kind of research facilities did you have access to there?
So honestly, not a lot. We weren't an R1 university. I don't think research was that emphasized at a university level, like a health science center level, but the opportunities were there if you sought them out. So my research mentor is an osteopathic physician who now just does research. And so I thought that was kind of unique and interesting. And because he had the time and the availability, I thought that was a good person to sort of latch onto. Otherwise, there were sort of PhDs who did a lot of basic science research that were maybe less clinical research oriented. But I'm certain that there are other medical schools that had far more sort of research opportunities than ours.
And how much time did you devote to research during your medical school career?
Hard to put a number to it, but I think you have to you have to be a really good medical student first.
Mm-hmm.
Like you should be doing really well in class and your clinical responsibilities before you're taking on research opportunities. So I think as a first year medical student, I really didn't do any research. I just made sure that I had a really strong foundation and good study practices and was doing well in school before I decided that I sort of had the bandwidth to take on more. And that would be my advice to anybody. Definitely sort of focus on what you have to do in order to graduate first. And then, if you're doing well and you're comfortable and you feel like you can take more on, then research is one of those things that you can take on.
Great. So there's a couple questions in the chat. Jeff wants to know, with your clinical research fellowship, was that through the school or another organization?
So it was through the sort of the PI, my mentor is an employee of the Health Science Center. So it was through the school in the sense that only TCOM students could apply and be selected for the position, but it wasn't a component of our curriculum or anything like that. It didn't show up on my transcript.
Oh, okay. And then Victoria is wondering, how did you manage medical school and a research fellowship at the same time? Or did you take an extra year?
I didn't take an extra year. I think this is a pretty unique opportunity. So the time period between MS1 and MS2 year, I'm not sure if you guys have a decent chunk of time or not, but that's a really valuable period of time. It's definitely the only chunk of free time that you'll get if it's something that you guys have at your school, to do with it what you want, without sort of the additional obligations of either coursework or clinical obligations. So that's when it started, and that's sort of what allowed us to have this time for didactic learning. And then, it's really just about time management after that. Taking projects sort of to completion. I didn't publish my sort of capstone project from that fellowship until I think second semester of fourth year. So it took a while to get that project off the ground and to follow up on it, but it's just about time management and using whatever time you have, sort of to the best of your ability.
Great, thank you. And that kind of brings up another question. You talked about taking projects all the way to completion and to publishing. How much did you pay attention to, like, WMC puts out this table B that says, oh, if you want 90% chance of matching, publish this many times. Did you pay attention to those numbers, or did you just say, I'm going to do what I can do, and that's all I got?
I think so. When I sat down with the program director of an orthopedic residency in like the first couple of years of med school, and he wrote on this sheet of paper his scoring system for how he reviews applicants. And I had that pinned like right next to my desk all through medical school as sort of a goal. I think data is really useful in the sense that it gives you an idea of what to work towards. But that's it, it's just an aggregate of information from a lot of people who have very different experiences and very unique applications, sort of outside of the numbers perspective of things. So I definitely tried to have X number of research experiences or X number of publications so that I sort of met the minimum criteria for somebody who was on average matching into orthopedics. But I still think that my goal was to make each of those experiences something that I could talk about on an interview and speak to sort of a skill or experience that made me better going forward.
That's super handy to know, because that leads directly into Brock's questions. Brock, would you want to unmute so it's not just me talking and ask your question?
I just want to interrupt you if you had kind of a masters of ceremony way you wanted to go, but You just mentioned briefly about the first part of my question, which I was asking about you personally, how many publications you had, and you had just mentioned that you were trying to get those kind of minimums of the averages someone might have. But going into orthopedics, how many publications did you actually have when you applied?
So I think that there's a couple answers to that question. A publication on your ERAS application can be an abstract that you presented at a conference that correlated to a poster or something like that. And so when you have a project, say a case report that you're writing up, you should present that abstract at as many conferences as you can, and then you should also try to get it published so that you're sort of double dipping. I probably had, I think when I applied to medical school, I had maybe 3 or 4 like PubMed ID manuscripts published, but each of those had been presented as an abstract at least once, maybe twice, and then I had some other projects that never made it to manuscript publication level, but were still projects that I presented at conferences. So I couldn't tell you exactly how many publications I had on my ERAS application. I could pull it up and take a look, but I think probably the more useful piece of information would be to look at the NRMP's, by the numbers information, and whatever you're interested in going into, look and see, what the average applicant has in terms of publications, and sort of make that your goal, or try to overshoot that if you can.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And so then kind of going further into that a little bit. So how did you talk about your research in your ERAS application? Did you talk about specific projects? I mean, you talked about what things you learned from specific research experiences in that light. Were there some things that you focused on more? Did you tailor it to the programs? How did you go about that?
So your ERAS application, I think this year you can actually choose sort of selected experiences to highlight, but even not just those selected experiences. You'll list an item, and then you'll have the opportunity to sort of give a description or a commentary on it. And so, some of the advice that I got was, you can have a million service experiences and talk about how you went to a dog shelter for 2 hours one day as a second-year medical student, but that didn't really, that didn't make you a better person. It didn't really impact you meaningfully. And so to list that on your application opens the door for a program director or somebody else to say, oh, tell me about that time that, you must really like dogs. Tell me about your time, working with these dogs in a dog shelter. And then you're like, oh, I don't even remember, it was this one thing that I did when I was a second-year medical student. So I think that's the risk you run in terms of just looking for bullet points in an application. It would be like, in an ideal world, you sort of weave a thread or a story in your ERAS application, and research can definitely be part of that. And for me, it was. So it's something that I mentioned in my personal statement, but I really tried to focus on, the skills that I acquired, or using my research as an opportunity to highlight a skill set or a characteristic about me, instead of just saying like, oh, I've done a bunch of research. Look, I'm a strong applicant because I did research. I think the application can speak for itself in that regard.
Awesome. Thank you so much. No, that's been, more than enough for sure on that. And then I don't want to take up too much people's times, but the third question I kind of had is, you've been telling that story, you weave that thread with your research throughout your application. So how did those conversations go in your interviews? Did you focus on more research-based programs because you were a relatively strong research candidate, or did you kind of just look at it and find those programs that fit well for you? And then how did the interviews go? And did you talk about your research a lot during your interviews?
I think every program is a little bit different. I applied to, I think, 98 programs. So there aren't 98 orthopedic programs that are research heavy. And I certainly didn't only apply to programs that were research oriented. I think if you go on rotations with programs, or if you just read about programs and you go on interviews and things like that, then you will gravitate towards programs that sort of match your skill and interest set. And similarly, programs will gravitate to you if you sort of match the mold of a person that they're looking for. So, it's sort of like I remember when I was applying to medical school and you had secondary applications and you could sort of try to tailor everything to every specific medical school that you were applying to. At the end of the day, your ERAS application is your ERAS application. You can tailor your personal statement, but it's usually no more than a sentence or two. And then, it's sort of like, here I am. Do you like me or not? And you can have the same thought process about programs. They're going to put their best foot forward, but at the end of the day, you'll definitely like some programs more than others. And maybe not. Research is a part of that.
I appreciate your comments a lot, MJ. I think that that's super good advice in how to talk about your research and make that part of who you are, not real specific to the project. Chris had a good question in the chat. He wants to know, from your experience, a lot of medical students, one of the things that they're able to do are literature reviews. It's something that everybody starts with because you have to understand literature, you have to understand how to critically think, those things. But when you look at how these things are weighted, research experiences, publications, are research reviews considered kind of a lesser form of research?
I don't think so. If there was like a hierarchy of research experiences, it would be something like, I don't know, an abstract at a meeting, a podium presentation, a manuscript in a journal that isn't indexed on PubMed, and then a manuscript that has a PubMed ID affiliated with it. So if you did a lit review and it was published in, we're talking a lot about orthopedics, but if it was published in, the Journal of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery, then that's a much better, much more higher value experience than, a lot of things. So
great. And Bobby, I saw your hand go up. Did you still have a question? Not hearing anything, we'll go on to my next question. So how important do you think research was for your residency match into orthopedic as a DO student? Oftentimes we hear that there's this bias, or that DO students are disadvantaged, particularly in this single match system now. How important do you think research is in that residency match?
I think it's a component of a larger application, and you as a person. Being on the other side, I go to a program that is historically osteopathic. They were an AOA program before the merger. So we haven't taken an allopathic applicant yet, but we interviewed some last year and just weren't that impressed with them. I think, I don't know, it's a piece of the puzzle. I don't know if it's any more important as an osteopathic applicant than it would be as an allopathic applicant. I think, honestly, I'm trying to think, I don't really know that osteopathic applications are, like, now that we see both of them, they don't look very different other than the school that you went to. And I think that's probably a testament to, if anything, the quality of the osteopathic applicant, because, objectively, there are some programs that are very storied in terms of their ability to match orthopedic applicants. And a lot of that is because of the resources that they have. Case Western, for example, matches like 18 orthopedic residents every year. And it's because they have they have residency there, and they have research fellows, and they have all of these connections to all these wonderful people who can write really, really powerful letters of recommendation. And, if you're at a DO school in a small town that's focused on producing primary care physicians, to put together an application that sort of stands up to one of those applicants is deserving of, I think, more respect than somebody else. So I don't know, that was a long-winded response, but I think it's as important as it is as an allopathic applicant.
I appreciate that. I'm actually going to ask, I see Dr. Small on the call, and I'm going to put him on the spot here for a minute and give you a break for just a second, MJ, and ask him what he thinks. How you've got the DO, you've got research. Is the DO bias that sometimes we hear about, or perhaps even some of our students feel, overcome by research?
The way I like to think of all of the advising things with match is, you're here. Okay, there are activities and things that you can do that bump your probability of matching up. And there are things that you can do or happen to you that bump your probabilities down. Very, very few of those are these or these. They're little bumps. Now, I think research is a positive bump, unless, as MJ said, you sacrifice your academics for that. I have heard from OB-GYN people that research is nice, but they really care about how you do academically. A residency is very much an academic experience in addition to just how hard can they work. And they care about little things like how well do their residents do on the specialty boards. So these are, the research is a bonus activity. We hear rumors that there are specialties like dermatology, ENT, ophthalmology, orthopedics, where if you don't do research, you're not going to match. I can't verify that with real data. I think it's probably true that doing some research things is better. Another thing that I have observed being back in the academic system, because MJ, I've only been back here for 5 years after a clinical career as a pathologist. One of the things I have re-observed is the different accounting systems that PhDs use for publications compared to MDs. And the MD one I find to be broader and matches your experience, that a lot of presentations, publications, letters to the editor, they sort of count. Whereas on the PhD side, getting a publication in Nature or one of the really big high impact journals is bigger than it is on the medical side. So I think it's going to depend on who your interviewer is, what the program director is, what their particular biases are toward different kinds of research. And you can't predict that. So you just do what you can do. If you do a case report, it's going to be a bump. How big a bump? I don't know. It's going to depend on the program. If you do a literature review on Pseudomonas infections, is that going to be a bump? Yes. How big? Again, I don't know. I think research is a good bonus activity. I think even for family medicine, internal medicine, it's still a bump. It may be a smaller bump, but it's still an upward bump to do some research projects. And then we docs get really focused on goals, and I get that. But there's also actually a maturation educational component to this, because unfortunately, a lot of the medical literature now is basically infomercials paid for by drug companies and device companies. Even in the New England Journal, they get infomercials. And so if you do some research, you have to really critically dig into some articles and start learning how to separate those out. It'll make you a better doc. It'll make you a more informed voter. It'll do all kinds of good things. So there is educational and maturation value in a specialty that is, your job is so dependent on science as a doc. And if you don't understand how science is done, you're a little bit handicapped. So I realize I have waxed on here, but those are my thoughts. And if anybody has any other questions about advising or whatever, what MJ is saying is kind of orthopedic focused, but it's definitely not unique to orthopedics, what he's saying. It really isn't.
Thank you, Dr. Small. MJ, next question. Harrison's got a great question in the chat. When you were applying to programs, you said you applied to 98 programs, right? Did you choose those programs? I mean, if you didn't do research, would you have applied to the research programs? Harrison, then we're going to get directly to your question then too.
Yeah.
Yeah? Still go for it, huh?
Yeah, I applied to the Hospital for Special Surgery, which has been the best orthopedic program in the country for like 10 years. Because why not? I don't know, it's 20 bucks.
Why not? Yeah, why not? Okay, so now Harrison's question directly. Harrison, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. MJ, first off, thank you so much for being here. My question, as we're talking about some of these like smaller little like abstracts being presented or the big publications holding a little bit more weight, is for some of those smaller ones and research in general, how did you use it as kind of a networking opportunity? Say you don't have the type of docs like an orthopedist doing research at your school. How are you using those, and how did you use those as networking opportunities to find those connections, and how did that play into residency applications?
I think it's becoming more and more of a thing. So if you have the option or the opportunity, then, you know, travel to present your project at a national conference. Like, you know, ACOS is the American College of Osteopathic Surgeons. They have an annual, maybe biannual meeting that a lot of my sort of mentees have presented projects at, and then they meet people there, and those turn into more opportunities. I think same goes for any national conference. Probably the most valuable thing from that experience is the people you meet and the hands you shake and the connections you build. So I would imagine pretty quickly the conversation becomes less about the research that you're doing and more about who you are and what you're interested in. But that's ultimately a good thing, because that's probably, you know, what they're going to remember you for, as opposed to the project that you're presenting. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does.
It does. Thank you.
So MJ, you brought up a really important point, and it was probably something that you said in passing, but now I'm going to pick on it. So you talked about some of the people that you're mentoring. Can you talk to me a little bit about, do you feel like your research allowed you to develop leadership skills that have been useful to you in residency?
I don't know that my research did that. I worked before med school, and I worked with high schoolers, so I think I had to learn how to make things happen and push people around a little bit in a friendly way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if research itself develops leadership skills. It's certainly more and more important as I transition out of the person who's like, you know, going through the chart review and collecting the data, and more the person who's, you know, helping generate ideas and make sure that projects are sort of feasible, and then having a team that can sort of help execute on things. But yeah, I guess Harrison, really quick, this just came, I wanted to mention this with your question. It's becoming, the opportunities for research to turn into mentorship, or mentorship to turn into research, is becoming more and more common, specifically in orthopedics, because I think people are acknowledging that there's a huge gap in terms of opportunities. So there's this organization called MSOS, the Medical Students Orthopedic Society, I think. It was founded by Dr. Ayer, who's at Hopkins, and Dr. Levine, who's the program director at Columbia, in conjunction with a lot of other people. But the whole purpose is to connect people who are interested in orthopedics with mentors in the field, residents and attendings, and usually pretty well-known faculty. So if any of you are interested in orthopedics, you should join that society and apply for a mentor, and then just get involved in general. I think, you know, the thought is to get people who have less connections and opportunities with orthopedic surgeons who are sort of in the academic community, to do that face time and that exposure, and to hopefully turn that into, you know, sort of a positive opportunity for you. Cool.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, Brock has another question. He wants to know how many audition rotations you did.
I did 5. I think 5 is a sweet spot. I was really, really tired after my 5th. Some people do 6, but you can also ruin your opportunities with a bad audition rotation. So just keep that in mind.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. And Dr. Small wanted to know, have you run into any students who did a research year between years 3 and 4? What are your thoughts on that? Is it a good idea? Is it not a good idea?
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly common. I think that's an awesome question, and I think something that I'm now encouraging any of my mentees to think seriously about. We had a few applicants last year who did, and I would say objectively their applications looked a lot more mature. They had really good experiences and very strong letters of recommendation, which is probably actually the best thing that comes out of a research year between year 3 and 4 if you do that. Because wherever you're going to do a research year, it's probably a place, they have the capacity and the funding to support somebody for 12 months. And, your PI or your mentor is probably going to be somebody who's pretty well published in the field, at least you'd hope so. So, some of these people went to NYU or Rothman, which is NYU and Rothman are probably the two bigger ones, but there's a bunch. And they had letters of recommendation from people who, you see and know about. So I think that's probably what made their application strongest, along with the fact that you have an additional year to build publications. So I'm sure all of them have twice as many publications as I do. Not that that's the most important thing, but you also then have time, right, to go back to your question about how did you make time for these things. You then have an additional year to develop skills that you can speak to on your application.
That's great. Tomorrow, just so that everyone on the call is aware, we actually have a noon session with 2 students who are doing a research gap year this year, one in neurosurgery and one in ENT. And so they're going to be talking tomorrow, and Dr. Miller is going to facilitate that discussion because I very well may be in the air still. We'll see. Who knows what's going to happen. So Dr. Miller will facilitate that. So come with your questions about how to do that. The students are going to be talking about why they chose that path and how they actually accomplished that. And I think MJ, you're right. It goes back to networking. And as Dr. Small put in the chat, those relationships are perhaps your biggest bump that you can get. And Jeff, can you clarify your question? When is it? What does that mean? Oh, when is the session tomorrow? It's at noon. It should be on your student calendar. All right. So, Andrew, you talked a little bit about this, but I'm wondering if you can address it a little more directly. And then I think Dr. Gubler may have a question. But can you address just a little bit more directly, how important do you think it is having research experiences versus the research publications? Now, you kind of gave us that hierarchy, but are experiences enough, or do you really need that publication?
I think experiences are probably more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of they should go hand in hand.
Okay.
Right? Like, if you have a lot of research experiences and no publications to speak for them, then the question that naturally follows is why.
Mm-hmm.
And people start to wonder, is it that you aren't able to follow through? Is it that you took on more than you could handle and then you weren't able to sort of see these things to the end? Or is it just that, like, you're just making things up on your application to make it look better?
Mm-hmm.
But, I think similarly, there are some people, and maybe this is a good example of how really having to work for and earn the things you put on your application, as opposed to like shaking a hand and being added to a manuscript, adds more value to your application. If you're able to really talk about your experience with the project or something like that on an interview, and speak to the skills that you sort of gained, or even just to speak passionately about a project that you sort of came up with and saw to fruition, that's a lot better than, if somebody asks you about a project and you say, oh yeah, that's a project I did with XYZ person, and then you recite the abstract and then you're done. So I guess those are sort of opposite ends of the spectrum, right? There's the person who has a ton of publications and like not a lot of research experience, and then there's a person with a lot of research experience but no publications, and you probably want to be somewhere in the middle.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you addressing that. Dr. Gubler, you want to ask a question?
Well, I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to editorialize a little bit. And that students approach this question almost uniformly the same. And it's, okay, what boxes do I need to get an X in, and how many X's in each individual box? And I don't think that's the message that MJ is sending. What MJ described, and I think he did a great job of it, is his research experience became part of his fabric, and it just became him. So he didn't have to worry about making a big deal about it. It just, it came out through his pores. And that's how research can really benefit you. If you're just doing it to get an X in a box, it probably maybe a little bump, a real little bump, but it's not going to give you the huge bump. And so I think that is the number one thing I've heard from MJ today is it's got to be your fabric, and it's just part of your fabric. It's not the whole thing. Now, MJ, this is a tougher question. Dr. Brooks and I were made aware of some data this week that said 82% of women in residency felt like they were discriminated against. And you're Teflon. I have seen you in action. Nothing sticks to you. You always have that smile, and you just keep moving. And I notice on this call, just glancing, it looks like the majority are women. Not surprising. And as a white male in an orthopedic residency, do you see women treated differently than males?
The short answer to your question is yes. But I think there's a much longer answer to your question. It's an issue that leaders in orthopedics are aware of and are actively working on. And as a white male, I want to do everything I can to help sort of address that issue. I think the study that you're referencing, there's one that came out a couple of years ago, maybe just a year ago, about the incidence of microaggressions in residency training, and they talked about women and men. And a lot of the microaggressions actually came from patients, which, not surprising, to be honest with you. Being mistaken for a nurse is an example of something like that. And I think the unfortunate reality is that, sometimes the way that you look or the way that you carry yourself lends you to more of those things. I can't tell you how many times this year somebody has looked at me and asked me how old I am or if I'm qualified to be doing what I'm doing. And that's not to say that I'm going through anything comparable to, an underrepresented minority or a woman in a field that's dominated by men. But I think it's also sort of wrong of me to tell all of the women on this call that it's just as easy for them as it is for me as a white male, because I don't know that it is. Us as a program, we're really proud of the fact that we have pretty good representation of women. We've got 2 women in our intern class, and there's a woman in each of our classes above, in my class and above me, except for our PGY4 class. So we're about a quarter female, which by the numbers is like the exception to the rule, right? And that's still a huge minority of people. But hopefully, I guess I'm optimistic that things will get better with time. I'm curious your perspective in general surgery, Dr. Gubler, over the years, because I know that that's an issue that they're addressing in the general surgery world as well, and they've been working on for probably longer than they have in orthopedics. Speaking on societies and sort of places for support for people who are interested in orthopedics and maybe don't look like the common applicant, the J.R. Gladden Society, I think, is the Society for Women in Orthopedics. It's national. They also have mentorship opportunities. I believe they also have a national conference, or at least they have breakout sessions at AAOS. There's another one for underrepresented minorities. And then actually, Jefferson Health just hosted this weekend, which hopefully we'll see more of these, a women in orthopedic symposium that was on Friday and hosted by a couple of my attendings, which is really cool. But short answer, yes. Long answer, hopefully the right people are working on making this a better thing.
So I'll quickly answer your question about general surgery, way ahead of ortho. And when I was in training, out of 20 residents, the whole time each year for 6 years that I was there was only one woman who went through general surgery. When I was a fellow at the University of Washington, all of their first year, the year I was a senior, were women. And if you look at surgical societies and experience in general surgery, there are more women entering general surgery now than men. There are more women in trauma surgery than there are men, and they are rapidly taking over the major general surgery type organizations. The executive director of the American College of Surgeons now is a woman, for example.
That's awesome. I think Dr. Small brings up a good point, is there's opposite gender bias in fields like OB-GYN too. So it's important to keep that all in mind, that we all have that responsibility to help engender the inclusivity of all of our medical students and residents. So MJ, I'm interested to know how important, and you talked a little bit about this already in terms of networking, but how important do you think it is to be part of a national society? Even just beyond the networking aspect of it.
I don't know that I could totally answer that question yet, because I haven't really benefited from one so far. Like I will. I'm sure that I will. Right now, I just work 80 hours a week, and try to make it to the next day. So I think it's important to be involved and to be part of your specialty in general. I would imagine Dr. Gubler echoes that. I know that he was with the medical director of Oregon for a while, or chair of the medical board in Oregon for a while. If you have the bandwidth and the interest, then being a physician is probably there are opportunities to get involved in your field and do more and more and more, other than just patient care, and then it sort of all comes full circle. I don't know. In orthopedics, there's lots of societies and lots of things that you can sort of pick and choose what you're interested in. But the AAOS and the AOAO, which is the historically allopathic and historically osteopathic societies for orthopedic surgery, are, I guess, probably societies I've benefited from both of already. They both give some funding to our program and stuff. So
that's awesome. I appreciate that. Student Dr. Landon Johnson put in the chat, you only work 80 hours? Wow, that's a lot.
It's the ACGME maximum, right? Only log 80 hours a week.
So you said something early on in your answers that I keep ruminating on, and so I'm going to ask you about it. You talked about looking at a lot of allopathic applicants and how none of them looked very good. They weren't what your program was looking for. So describe the ideal applicant to us.
Oh, geez. Well, I guess I should back up and say it's not that they didn't look good. They had good applications, and it just as it's probably wrong to put every osteopathic applicant in a bucket, it's probably wrong to put every allopathic applicant in a bucket. But I think probably first and foremost, the ideal applicant is somebody who wants to be at your program. My sister is in residency for cardiothoracic surgery, and that's something that she actually mentioned to me, like the year that I was applying. We were talking about what I should do in terms of building a good application and sort of standing out to programs. And she was like, well, if there are places you want to be, you should tell them that. Because that does a lot for the culture of a program, to be filled with people who are excited to be where they are, as opposed to be filled, you could be filled with super stellar applicants, but everybody's upset that they're at your program. And then your culture is probably not so great. So I think that's huge. That's probably more important than anything. And then the I guess like the best applicant is the best resident. I'm just a PGY2, so I probably can't speak to it perfectly. But one of my mentors who I met when I was on an audition rotation talked about the 4 T's, and that was tireless, teachable, tolerable, and team oriented. And that was his advice to me as a rotating medical student in terms of how I could be a good med student. But I think that probably applies to being a good applicant, and not just saying that you are those things, but having sort of things to back it up. And that's ultimately probably what you're looking for in a resident as well.
How do you show somebody you're tolerable? What kind of evidence do you give them to show them that you're tolerable? Do you talk about teamwork? Like if you worked on a research team, does that show them that you're tolerable? How do you show them that, T?
Yeah, sure. Great question. It's not something you can get across in a personal statement. It's not something you should try to get across in a personal statement, probably. It would sound ingenuine. It's probably also not something that you'll be able to get across on paper on an ERS application, with the exception of letters of recommendation. If you have letters that say that you integrated really well into the team, you worked really well with others, you played a critical role, and they were thankful to have you, that probably checks the tolerable box, or they enjoyed your company. And orthopedics is kind of a weird exception to this, but you spend a month at a lot, 4, 5, 6 programs or something like that, and it's usually pretty easy to tell pretty quickly whether you're going to be tolerable. And then you've got a month to either prove that or disprove whether you are not tolerable.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. When you requested your letters of recommendation, did you draft letters for them, or did you say specifically, like, could you specifically speak to my teamwork, or how specific were you when you asked for those letters of recommendation?
So I didn't draft letters without being asked to. One of my letter writers told me that I should write my letter of recommendation and then he would sign it, which scared the bejesus out of me. It was very hard to do. But I did provide, so there's this standard letter of recommendation template that I think CORD put together, which is the Council on Orthopedic Residency Directors. And it's meant to be an abbreviated, like a way that program directors or anybody who's writing a letter of recommendation can work through this form and put together a letter of recommendation. So I shared that form with them. And I said, you can fill this out and submit a standard letter of recommendation, which bears as much value and weight. And speaking to program directors, there's the letter portion, and then there's like a narrative opportunity at the end. And they felt that was just as valuable as a de novo letter of recommendation. But what it does is it gives them ideas of what to speak to. And then, if this is somebody who you really trust and you're counting on to write you a really strong supportive letter of recommendation, then I think you can tell them specifically the sorts of experiences. So like, I think when I requested a letter of recommendation to one person, I was like, they said yes. And I said, okay, great. Here, just, in my experience, this is why I'm asking for you to write me a letter of recommendation. Here are some experiences that, I think stick with me in terms of the time that I spent with you, and sort of the qualities that I'm trying to portray in an application. If this is useful for you in your letter of recommendation, great. If not, whatever. There are probably sort of tactful, tasteful ways to provide some information and say, hey, this is sort of my thought process. Here's why I'm asking for a letter. And there are sort of different fields of thought in terms of whether you should ask somebody if they'll write you like a strong or a supportive letter of recommendation. Some people would say if you feel like you have to ask for a strong letter of recommendation, then you're probably not asking the right person. Some people would say, God forbid, they say yes and they write you a poor letter, you're sunk in the water. You're not going to get an interview anywhere. So it's tough. I think it's probably more a matter of your level of comfort with that person in terms of the conversation you can have with them.
Yeah. I appreciate that perspective. I think having to write your letter of recommendation is one of the worst things you can do. I hate it when people ask me for that. I'm going to give you another quick break because I want to ask Dr. Small if he can talk a little bit about some of the changes in ERAS and how students can indicate location preference. Because I think that was a really important aspect that you talked about.
It is, it's interesting that there are some specialties where the hospital loses money on every resident they take, and they sort of think they're going to make it up if that resident works in the same community where they did their residency and refer back to the hospital. And this sounds bizarre, I know. But that's apparently the location preference, the geographic signal that you put on your application. There are some specialties that take that really, really seriously. And they want to see if you have, family support in the region. If you've lived, let's say you're applying to Michigan or Minnesota or Wisconsin, and you grew up in Maui, they're going to wonder if you have a clue about what you're getting yourself into, or if you just applied because it was an empty box on the ERAS application. So think about the geographic signals. Then there are also things called preference signals, and every specialty has a different number of preference signals. Orthopedics happens to have, I think, 30 preference signals this year. Some specialties have 3. So the strategy is different for each specialty. The findings are that if you put your preference signals on programs you're decently competitive for, you are likely to get interviews at the programs where you put preference signals. And if you have a geographic preference and a preference signal and the program matches both, you're even a little more likely to get interviews with that combination. The data, N equals like 1 with that data. So because everything changed after COVID, people started applying to more programs after COVID. They started having virtual interviews. So you weren't spending, thousands of dollars travel and rental car and all that to go to a few interviews. So all the rules of the game have changed, and Dr. Miller and Dr. Haldy and so on and I are running behind the train trying to keep up with the data that's coming out. I think those observations are pretty accurate. And MJ, you were channeling me when you were talking about how you asked for letters of rec, because I always tell students to thank them for the educational experience and all their time, and then say, I have taken the liberty of listing 3 to 5 bullet point experiences that were meaningful to me on that rotation. Feel free to use these any way you like. And I'm coming from the point of view of a letter writer who, like probably 97% of other letter writers, has at times procrastinated on a letter. And I would see that email and I would pick up my dictaphone and I would say, thank God. And I would start dictating the letter right then. And so it sounds like you and I had very similar thinking on that. The letter of rec it's part of that whole relationship thing. And I hopefully, I don't have data. I hope that a preceptor who was not going to write you a good letter would say, you probably don't want me to write that letter.
Mm-hmm. Or just not respond. So Mia had a question, MJ, in the chat. She wants to know, did you apply to any programs that have historically not accepted DOs? And did you get interviews there?
Yeah. I applied really broadly. And I did get some interviews, yes. So it's probably not worth listing numbers, but I did interview at some places that are historically allopathic. And for what it's worth, where I'm at, I ranked above 2 or 3 historically allopathic programs, and I felt really good about that. So yeah, I don't know.
So-
Short answer.
You probably can't answer this question, but we'll see. And we might need to get Dr. Gubler or Dr. Small to weigh in. But if you do apply to traditionally allopathic programs, ones that haven't accepted DOs, and you get that offer, you get that, yeah, we want you. Do you take it? Like, is there a disadvantage to being a DO at a traditionally allopathic program?
I think once you're in, it's a level playing field. At least in residency, you'll I don't know. That's, I guess, a little bit of a hard question to answer because
Well, because you don't have that experience. Yeah.
So my medical school's home institution is John Peter Smith, which is, they have an orthopedic surgery residency that was accredited by the ACGME, has been for a very long time, and they have a history of taking mostly allopathic applicants with usually one applicant from my school, and so they have a smattering of DOs throughout their whole program, and they're just colleagues.
So you don't even think about it after you get into residency.
No.
That's good.
I would imagine, there are maybe 2 situations where somebody cares about your degree after residency, and that's maybe when you're applying to fellowship and maybe when you're applying for a job in a very competitive market, and you're talking with somebody who holds some sort of bias for or against, and for or against is totally relevant because there are some programs, some practices that are comprised entirely of DOs as well. So yeah, at the end of the day, if you match, you open an envelope and it tells you where you're going, and that's where you're going.
That's true.
So, that's in some senses that decision is made for you. But I didn't incorporate, to me, there was no fear of being the odd one out as a DO at a historically allopathic program. If anything, I think I would wear it as a badge of pride.
That's awesome. Do you work with other DOs? Do you have other DO residents?
Yeah, we're entirely DO.
Okay. That's awesome. Well, unfortunately, our other panelist wasn't able to make it. He often gets pulled into surgery. Who knows what's gone on? But are there any last minute questions? Otherwise, I don't want to keep MJ for a whole nother hour and make him talk. But any last minute questions, feel free to speak up or throw them in the chat. Give you just a few minutes. Dr. Gubler, do you have any other last minute questions?
I don't think I'll ask any questions, but anybody who's on this can always reach out to me from my perspective. And I'll just tell you, and MJ knows this, my perception of the world I grew up in and the world he's grown up in is very different. And I was the second DO ever accepted into MD military residency in the Navy, and I was about the 8th DO in an ACGME surgical program. And my entire career, I've had to explain what DOs are, and I'm pretty sure MJ saw it in my partners, because all of my partners, when he rotated with me, were MDs, and occasionally it came to the surface.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough, MJ. I so appreciate you just being our sole panelist and fielding all the questions. And thank you so much for putting your contact information in the chat. For those who didn't see it, it's there if you are interested in orthopedics. Having somebody who's kind of been through and is in the trenches and has been through where you are right now is helpful. So thank you all so much for joining us. Don't forget about the noon session tomorrow, and then tomorrow night is Shark Tank. So super excited. We've got some great sharks. We've got some good projects. So we'll see everyone there, hopefully. Thanks, MJ. Take care.
Sure
Thank
thing.
you for your time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dean, a friend of mine's father was a DO surgeon. His name was Walter Mill, in Denver. And he worked at the Rocky Mountain Osteopathic Hospital, which used to be a separate hospital down in the sort of university area of Denver. And I just remember watching him do a quick adjustment on my friend after a long car drive and thinking, it's interesting. So I never had any strong opinion about DO versus MD. But my opinion, for whatever reason, was always the degree doesn't matter. It's here and it's in the heart. That is what matters with who takes care of me. And like I left Duke thinking that there were ICU nurses that I would rather have take care of me than some of the docs. You've probably had the same experience. So you're muted. You're still muted. Yeah.
Surgeons are just different animals. That's why historically, when you look at the, incursion of DOs into the ACGME world, it all started in the thinking specialties. And, and there were some exceptions. Cleveland Clinic and cardiothoracic surgery, they were early adapters. And I think that's probably because of just the population of DOs in that part of the world.
Right.
But even when I sat on the ACGME merger committee between the AOA and ACGME, it was the surgeons and the manipulators. Manipulators didn't want to merge and the surgeons didn't want to merge because surgeons couldn't see how DOs could ever be a good surgeon, and the manipulators couldn't see how an MD could ever be, a holistic physician. It was the most absurd, unadult conversation I'd ever witnessed.
Incredibly human. Yeah, I got to my first job because, I went to Duke, that is Allopath Central, and then went to the University of Utah for residency, pretty highly allopathic also. And then I got to my first job in Vegas and there were these people called DOs. And I found out, some of them were great docs and some of them weren't. Well, so what else is new? That's true of every population. And so and then I took on DO med students back in the early 90s for teaching as a preceptor for pathology rotations. Because one of my senior partners did it, and he said, "Hey, you want to join me, and we can split the responsibilities?" I said, "Yeah." And one of them was a gal named Ann Trawick, who you may have run into. She's one of our PCM faculty at Colorado. She was a fourth-year student in my lab when I was a wet behind the ears young pathologist.
Wow.
So.
Well, there's a lot of stories out there, and
a lot of anecdotes.
Yeah,
and there are still some firebrands running around frankly, in both communities that are doing more harm than good. I see some DO people saying, "Well, those guys in the allopathic program, they should just sit down and learn how to take Comlex." Well. Yeah. When are they going to do that in their spare time? How are they going to figure it out? And then I hear stories like from Bob Henderson, who is interesting. He's a DOMD. Funny, weird pathway to get that degree. And he said that there was a guy from my alma mater who basically slammed the table and said, "There will never be a DO in this residency program," somewhere in the Western North Carolina. So, yeah, I guess it should never be surprising when people act like people, but sometimes it just is.
Yeah, and I don't know. I could keep you up all night telling you the things I ran into, but
I'm sure. And And then we all have the sort of personal experience, recall bias, whatever you want to call it, that if somebody is just plainly a jerk, but we've been beat up on something or other enough times, we attribute it to, and say anti-DO prejudice, when actually the guy's just a jerk.
Yeah.
It's just a jerk.
Well, I think, you know, what MJ said is what I always carried with me. It was a challenge to make me be better.
Yeah.
And
Well, what I would have said, but we were running out of time. I would have said, look into your own heart. How much do you like carrying a spear into battle? Some people live for that, to charge in and change things and shake things up. And other people would be, you know, they'd have bloody diarrhea if they did that. And so you just have to, part of the answer to that question, I personally think, is, hey, look at what you want to do. I hope there are pioneers in our school, but do I expect that all 300 plus graduates are excited about going out and being a pioneer? No. Why, you know?
oh, somebody's coming in with us.
I see that student doctor Ellie Laughlin.
I don't know if she's really here. Are you there, Ellie? I don't know. I'm gonna have to jump off. I've got another meeting.
Oh,
Oh,
my goodness.
Ellie, just in case, did you have a question for me? Because I'm gonna have to jump off. Oh, you're
you're
muted.
muted.
Oh, sorry. No, that's okay. No worries.
All right. Well, I'm gonna say goodnight, so I'm not late for
Good
this
night.
next one. Bye.
Bye-bye. So, Ellie, were you hoping to come in on the research in residency?
I think I might have clicked the wrong Zoom link. Was it the other one?
It was an hour ago when it's.
Okay. Yeah, I saw
It'll
it went to
It will
Fox, so-
be it's recorded, so it should be available.
Perfect. Okay, I'll
good.
check out the recording.
Are you an ortho wannabe?
No, I'm actually interested in ophthalmology, which also requires quite a bit of research too.
Well, it doesn't necessarily require it, but it's helpful. It's really helpful. What year
Yeah.
What year are you?
A second year this
Okay.
year. So
Send me an email and tell me you're in Colorado. Okay, yeah, send me an email and tell me you're interested in off, and because I've got a few contacts left from.
okay.
You know, I'm aging rapidly here, but I still know a few people in the ophthalmology community. So
Yeah. Are they DOs as well?
nope,
Okay. Yeah.
they're MDs like me, or
Yeah.
even mudfuds like me.
Well, that would be great. I'll send you an email, Dr. Small.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I may have a project or two that we could possibly set you up with.
Okay.
And the guy I'm thinking of, he's been terrific about doing it, but he is so overcommitted and so busy
Mm.
and so smart that it
Mhm.
can be a little frustrating. But he's gotten I think he's gotten a couple of our students into ophthalmology residencies. So I think he's a good resource and a great guy.
What was his name? Did you say, or I don't know
I
if I
did.
missed.
Peter Hovland. He's
Okay.
mostly at Porter Hospital in Denver.
Nice.
But it's this big, huge Colorado retina group. There's these like megaplex specialty groups, like Denver Aurora Cardiology Associates has entire 5-story office buildings along I-225. There's what's it called? Panorama Orthopedics has like 5 of those. They've got a office building with an entire indoor gymnasium in it.
Wow.
That's
Good
unbelievable.
for them. That's a nice.
Well, yeah, they've been very successful. I'm trying to recruit one of them to help us with some research projects too. So,
Yeah.
and if you know somebody in the field, that can be good too.
Yeah, I actually I was matched through the Rocky Vistas mentoring program
Okay,
with an ophthalmologist. They're in southern Utah though, so it would be a little difficult to meet with them in person, which I think is always a little easier and
I think
better.
it's better if you can, but if they
Mhm.
have a case report, bring it up. Just say, hey, do you have a
Yeah.
case report, or do you have a subject you'd like to review? And we can get you a Rocky Vista faculty member to help with all the administrative stuff. Yeah, it'd be real easy for you, Doc, to all you'd have to do is supply a little bit of raw material to us and we'll take it and run. So
Mhm.
you can make that offer to the ophthalmologist down there. And if you have a couple other students, so much the better.
Yeah.
See, you get the same credit on your CV if there's 3 authors or 5 authors. There's no dilution. You don't lose a thing. What you do dilute is the work. So if you recruit 2 or 3 other students, you do a third the work potentially,
Right.
which
Right.
is frankly worth something
Yeah.
these days. So,
Yeah.
okay,
Absolutely.
Ellie, well, I'll look forward to it. I'm going to sign off. I did my high intensity weight training today and I'm
Ready for a break.
I
Yeah.
am tired.
Yeah.
How's respiratory 2 going?
It's going okay. I personally thought I did a little better than it turns out to be on the exam. But we have we have a lot of pharmacology on the second one, as you know, and I have some. I really like the sketchy videos for pharm. I think pharm has always been something that I've been. It comes to me a little better sometimes than the pathology.
I
So
have to tell you, I am 180 degrees the opposite.
yeah, yeah,
Pharmacology, it was my hill to die on.
yeah.
I was an organic chemistry major. I mean,
Oh yeah,
it should have been simple. No, I
yeah.
I had a stack of 3x5 flashcards. Anki was not even a dream at that point.
Mhm, mhm.
And so I had flashcards for farm and flashcards for micro.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't have good luck with flashcards for much else, but for those 2, memory heavy,
absolutely.
and we didn't have anything ending in imabab at that
Yeah,
point either. There were
yeah,
no imamabs. There were a few mouse monoclonal antibodies being produced in research labs, and that was it when I was in med school. So,
yeah. Now there's an entire new category of treatments.
oh yeah, some
Yeah,
of them miraculous, some of them maybe miraculous.
yeah, yeah.
But
Well, I wish.
if you watch TV, those commercials are very inspiring,
Yeah, and
Show,
everyone's always having a great
show
time.
the psoriasis plaques in pulsating orange looking like lava and then melting away with,
Yeah,
you know, Recluximab or what the hell it is.
they're all pretty similar to that.
I know.
Yeah, I wish I had your micro brain though, because that would serve me very well. But
Well,
unfortunately,
I have done, if there's anything you've found that helps you, please let me know, because I have the disadvantage that you have being the quote expert is that you've done it for 30 years and you probably did your PhD in microbiology because micro was easier for you, probably. And so it's harder for me to sort of channel the challenges that some students have. So any feedback I can get on that, I will always apply to making things better for your successors.
yeah,
As you can tell, I've thought about this a lot from all the different, the how to learn micro lecture and the worksheets and all of that stuff, because it doesn't, I don't care if people suck at micro and but I do want them to know enough to not hurt their patients. You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I probably know that amount, but the
Hey,
amount I would like
yeah,
to know
Good
is
for
still-
you. And if you know how to treat, with bronchodilators, you're way ahead of me.
Only thanks to you, Dr. Small. The extent of my microbiology knowledge is coming from you. So you're a good
Well,
one.
And Dr. Ambler, who was great, and Dr. Hallstrand is good too. So, I think we
Yes.
have a good micro team.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not a big micro team, but I think we have a good micro team. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I hope Dr. Ambler's back soon. We haven't gotten any updates on him, but I've been
Yeah.
thinking of him. So
yeah,
he's
the
okay.
Christian Medical Group does, a 5 p.m. Bible study every Monday night, and we pray for him every Monday
Yeah.
night. And hey, you know
Yeah.
what? As the Jewish mother said, what harm?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you do that.
Yep.
So,
All right.
all right. I'll let you go, but thank you. I'll send you an email.
Bye-bye.
Right up, Small.